breakfast during our session. And we all hope that you had a productive day yesterday. I know some of us are relatively tired, but just like last year, I promise you that we are going to have an eye-opening breakfast again this year. I'm quite lucky because my guests today on the stage, they don't really need much of introduction. We have today, to my immediate left, Fatih Birol, of course, Chief Economist of the International Energy Agency, and to Dr. Birol's left is Carlos Pascual, Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs of the U.S. Department of State. I'm pretty sure that you know both of them, so without any further ado, and for the sake of time, I'm going to invite Fatih Birol to the podium to make his presentation. Dr. Birol will be followed by Mr. Pascual, and then we are going to have a Q&A session, and that will conclude our breakfast session this morning. So, with that note, Dr. Birol, please, to the podium. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Taner. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. As Mr. Taner just mentioned, last year here, I tried to share with you a couple of our thinking at the IEA in terms of global energy picture. And it was based on the World Energy Outlook we did last year. And this year, we did just publish another edition of the book. And I wanted to follow up the discussions we had last year. What did we say last year and what is happening this year, and a bit of an outlook. But before that, let me mention to you that I came yesterday from Paris, and we had the International Energy Agency, our meeting, biannual ministerial meeting, a very good meeting, chaired by the Turkish Energy Minister, Taner Yildiz, with the participation of several of our member countries, ministers, as well as several emerging countries, such as China, India, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, and Indonesia. And we were delighted that the Secretary Moniz made a very impressive presentation about the developments in the US and their impact for the global energy markets. And we did also appreciate the several dynamic and to the point interventions of Ambassador Pascual, who is here today. So it means he's going to listen to us. Sorry for that, Carlos. More or less the same story, but from a different angle, perhaps, this time. Now, before looking at the future, I wanted to tell you what I think where we are today in terms of global energy scene. Is this working? No. Okay, perfect. Now, first of all, what I would say is that as a result of the changes in the, especially with the shale revolution, both gas and also on oil, they had profound impacts. One of the impacts is that, if I may say so, the job description of many energy actors are rewritten. Some of the countries who have been major energy importers are becoming significant energy exporters, changing the role. United States will come in a minute, but also Brazil. This year we work on Brazil a lot in our World Energy Outlook, and one of the things what we have found out is that around 2015, a few years from now, Brazil will be a net oil exporter, and after that growing very strongly, joining the top 6 oil producer of the world. So there is a change in the role of some countries. And again, some energy exporters, known to be energy exporters and producers, are becoming, at the same time, major energy consumers and having impact on the global energy markets as a consumer as well. not only with their production exports, but with their consumption as well. And Middle East countries is an example, and I will elaborate that in a moment. And also, we see, dear colleagues, that the trade patterns are also changing. There will be an ever-growing trade linkage now between Middle East and Asia. The center of gravity of the oil trade is moving to Pacific from the Atlantic very strongly. So these are the new things which I said to rewrite the job description of key players. When I say, for example, some patterns are changing, trade patterns, one example I can give you, if we have colleagues from Canada here today, I don't know, but if there are any, I can tell you that the Canada will need to have to look at more and more to Asia. Russia, if we have Russian colleagues, Tatiana was here, I just saw a couple of minutes ago, Russia, in addition to the loyal and long-standing client of Europe, they may want to look at Asia a lot. And also West Africa, providing a lot of oil to the United States, may need to look for new clients as well. So trade patterns are changing. So there are a lot of things changing, but there are certain things which are not changing and which we would like to see changing. One of them is increase in the carbon dioxide emissions. Energy is responsible about 2/3, very significant, 2/3 of the emissions lead to climate change. And when I will show you the numbers in a minute, it means that without fixing the problem in the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to fix the climate problem. CO2 emissions are increasing despite the improvements in energy efficiency. I heard from Mr. Tanner that you had a good discussion on energy efficiency yesterday, which is very important. And this is very new, ladies and gentlemen. I try to look at all the countries in the world. All the governments are not only talking about energy efficiency, as it was the case in the past, but they are implementing energy efficiency policies, legally binding standards, rules, pricing policies, and as a result of that, last year, we have seen global, worldwide energy efficiency of the world increase about 4 times higher than the historical averages. And these energy efficiency improvements are not necessarily driven by climate change concerns. They are mainly driven by bringing the cost of energy down concerns, but at the end of the day, it helps to climate change as well. Fossil fuel subsidies, a major issue in Middle East and elsewhere, is now more than $500 billion we estimate, and as such, it is for me the major challenge for energy efficiency and climate change, is when the fossil fuels are so artificially cheap, extremely cheap, we tend to use it in a wasteful manner, the mankind, and as a result of the wasteful use of energy is encouraged. One issue which I know very close to the heart of Ambassador Pascual, which we have been working on that since 10 years. Today, 1.3 billion people, about 1/5 of the global population, they have no access to electricity. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and most importantly, Sub-Saharan Africa. And we think this is an energy issue as well as an economic, security, and maybe a moral issue for all of us. Another point before we go to future to highlight today is about the energy prices. We are not very much aware, we don't talk much, but I don't know if we are all aware, since 3 years, global oil prices are over $100. $100, which has been years and years a psychological benchmark, this benchmark, that benchmark, but since 3 years, the oil prices averaged, I am not saying that it is the one day, but average 3 years over $100, with major implications on the current account balance of many countries, including that of my country, Turkey. Because not only the oil import bill are increasing, but in many cases, as our Russian colleagues know very well, and Norwegian colleagues, the gas prices are indexed to oil prices, and the gas import bill is increasing, which is a major problem for the current account deficit of the energy importing countries. Finally, in terms of prices, a rather recent phenomena, there are substantial differences in the regional energy prices, especially for natural gas and electricity prices, which have major implications, among other things, on the competitiveness of countries vis-à-vis each other. Now, these are the current picture that I wanted to tell you. When we look at the future, when we see that the energy demand in the OECD countries that I am in my organization is representing, their demand is rather stable, and the OECD countries, US, Canada, Europe, Japan, and the others, their contribution to global energy demand growth is almost negligible. You can completely ignore that. The growth is mainly coming from Asia. About 2/3 of the growth of global energy demand is coming from Asia. And one issue here that we highlight in our World Energy Outlook, up to now we have been talking China is the driver of global energy demand, which is still the case, but what we see around 2020, towards 2020, China energy demand growth slows down, not declines, growth slows down, and India is becoming the engine of the global energy demand growth, especially for oil and coal. And this is something that we have to see. India, around 2020, will be the engine of the growth with a rather reasonable economic growth assumption around 5%. Then, of course, Middle East. We are very close to Middle East, and Middle East is responsible, a significant part of the global energy consumption growth. We have been always thinking of Middle East producing countries, but as I said, they are also becoming consumers. Just give you two numbers. Amount of electricity capacity, power plants, countries in that region will build in the next 20 years is about 380 gigawatts, so, which means current capacity, electricity capacity of Japan plus Korea. So Middle East countries will build power plants in the next 20 years equal to one Japan plus one Korea of today. A huge electricity capacity infrastructure need, plus there is, of course, the transmission and distribution lines to be built there. Second, in terms of oil consumption, we think with this pace, with these subsidy regimes in place, which are very low for the consumption prices, we think the Middle East consumption, oil consumption, their domestic consumption comes about 10 million barrels per day very soon, which is equal to the current oil consumption of China. So Middle East will consume oil, which is more or less equal to consumption of China today, which will have a major implication for the export availability of those countries. So other countries also contribute, and we perhaps look at the fuels in the next years to come. We have been talking in such meetings a lot about the decarbonization of the energy system since years. So less fossil fuel share, pushing renewables, pushing nuclear power and others since years. But one of the findings of our study is 25 years ago, share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix was 82%. And despite these efforts last 25 years, the current share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix is still 82%. So no change of the share of fossil fuels in the last 25 years in the global energy mix, despite the efforts for renewables and despite the nuclear energy playing a significant role in some countries. So this is a good news for some, not good news for the others. And when we look at the future, we expect the renewables to grow strongly, mainly as a result of the government policies supporting renewables. in some countries, generous subsidies for renewables, and renewables make a strong contribution. And in terms of fossil fuels, the gas has the largest contribution. Some of you may remember 2 years ago we made a book, Are We Entering a Golden Age of Gas? With a question mark, and this is definitely, we see there are some hurdles in that direction, but the direction is clear. The growth coming from gas alone is equal to the growth coming from oil plus coal put together. And of course, this has, as I mentioned, implications for the carbon dioxide emissions. Now, one word on oil. Last year, when I was privileged to talk with you here, one of the messages I conveyed to you from our book is that United States, around 2017, will be the largest oil producer of the world, overtaking Saudi Arabia and Russia. Now, this year's findings confirms that trend, and even we think it may be even a few years before, around 2015, United States will be the largest oil producer of the world. This is definitely a very good news for United States, and for the rest of the world, definitely something that we all need to be happy about. But I believe some of us have been carried away with this very finding. Let me explain you what I mean. In the next 10 years, we see that the production growth from United States, especially with the shale oil. This is for the colleagues who do not work on these things every day. This can be considered as the younger sister of shale gas. We see a strong increase in shale oil, which is a very good news, as I said. But the proven resource base is not as big as the shale gas, and therefore we think around 2020 it comes to a plateau and stay there, and the production from Middle East will be less needed because Brazil is also coming in the picture, and this is the first chapter of the oil story. But there is a second chapter, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the policy messages we are going to give to the Middle East producers are very important. After 2020, we need Middle East oil, more and more. Large resource base, much cheaper than many other countries, and therefore it is very important to see and to put in our minds that the Middle East is and will remain critical to global oil supply. We do not need to give wrong signals to Middle East producers, because if we want the Middle East oil 2020 to come into the markets, we have to deal with the investment issues now. There are many companies here who know these things much better than me. You don't push the button and next day the oil comes from the fields. Therefore, the signal we need to give, according to our numbers, to the Middle East producer is that the world needs Middle East oil, and in a significant manner, especially after 2020, and especially to meet the growth in Asia, coming from China, India, and also from East Asia. So, about renewables. Renewables are growing worldwide, as I said, and the biggest growth, unlike some of us may think, is coming from China. China renewable electricity generation growth is equal to the growth coming from US plus Europe plus Japan put together. A huge growth coming from China and of course other countries as well. A very strong growth, again mainly driven by government support. But when we say renewables, some of us are focused only wind and solar. However, our numbers show that about 50%, half of the renewable generation comes from hydropower first, and then wind and solar coming on top of that, which are growing also very strongly. But the renewable growth has significant implications for different markets. We may discuss in a couple of minutes, and in terms of the economics of it and the integration to the power markets. My final point is a bit of a elaboration on the impact of shale revolution for the global economy. Last year, again linking to last year, I had the privilege to tell you that the shale gas and shale oil in the US, Canada, and also from Australia growing very strongly, and this will affect not only the energy markets but beyond that. And this year we did look on one of the areas, namely how these different energy prices in different regions affect the competitiveness of different countries. First of all, let's look at the prices of natural gas compared to the United States. A few years ago, everything was very tranquil, very normal, that the prices in Europe, China, and Japan were more or less equal to the US prices. 1-to-1 ratio, 1 to 1.2, 1 to 0.8. Everything was rather tranquil or normal. And as a result of the shale gas revolution, today we see a major price disparity. In Europe, we were talking about Madam Commissioner, in Europe it is 3 times more expensive than United States, and in Japan it is 5 times more expensive than United States. This is a serious story for these countries. But more serious is it, I believe, that these price differentials, which are amazing for such a strategic good like natural gas, is set to remain for many years. It is not an issue of today, it's a structural issue. We may well see US gas prices to increase a bit, and the prices in Japan and Europe decrease a bit and narrow down the difference, but there will be a difference, we think, at the order of at least 2 times more expensive. Natural gas prices will be about 2 times, in optimistic terms, more expensive than the United States, in Europe, and in Japan. And this is a serious stuff for many years to come. This is not only for today, it will be with us for many years to come. And when we look at the electricity prices, we also see that the European and Japanese electricity prices will be again significantly higher than those in the United States. As a result of the first, fuel as the gas as an input to electricity generation is more expensive. Second, some government policies ranging from renewable subsidies to taxes and the others makes the European electricity prices significantly high. European electricity prices increased in the last 10 years in real terms more than 2 times. Incredible, more than 2 times in real terms. So what does this price differential mean? And it means a lot for many things, but one of them, we look at what does it mean for the energy intensive industries, where you have cost of energy, a significant portion of the total cost of producing something. Something may be a petrochemical, it can be aluminum, it can be iron, steel, cement. The industries which make 30% or higher energy cost of the total cost are significantly affected from that. And these sectors are very important. Worldwide, they make about 20% of the industrial output and about 25% of the industrial employment jobs. Okay? So we look at how this price differential, if they stay with us, will affect those industries and different parts of the world in terms of their share in the international trade of these goods, of petrochemicals, fertilizers, aluminum, etc. What we see is that there are winners and losers. Winners are US, China, and other emerging countries. They are increasing their market share, international trade, aluminum and the others, whereas Europe and Japan see substantial amount of decline in their market share of these products because they are very much disadvantaged in terms of their cost of producing these goods. So I believe this highlights the very issue that the energy policies, both in Europe, we have more colleagues from Europe here, I should mention, I believe in Europe have never been so critical or have rarely been so critical for the prosperity of the European economy for many years to come. To have sound energy policies is very important in Europe, especially at this juncture of the time. So last 2 slides, one issue that perhaps even Ambassador Pascual may refer as well. One key question for many of us, so US and Canada, they have a lot of gas now as a result of the shale gas revolution. How much they are going to export, when they are going to export, and how and if they are it is going to affect the gas markets. So we assume, or we expect that normally US may export about 50, 60 BCM, around 20 together with Canada's contribution. And this may, there's a potential, this may even go beyond that to up to 100 BCM through 2035. There is a room for that. When you look at the gas, when you look at the applications, when you look at the appetite from the many importers. But, ladies and gentlemen, it will be wrong, we believe, at least our analysis show, that even if US would export, and Canada, substantial amount of natural gas, to see US gas prices and the gas prices at the, in Europe and in Japan coming very close to each other will be only a sweet dream for many importers. We have to understand that. This will be very nice, but for the importers at least, it is a sweet dream because of, among other things, the cost of bringing gas from point A to point B. Just to give you an example, today, as you see in this blue bar, today the gas price in the United States is $3.5 on average. If you want to bring this gas to Asia, to Japan, it is today $16, the price is $15, $16. Just to bring there, if you take the decision, costs you the shipping, liquefaction, etc., about $6. Very significant amount of money, the cost of bringing there, and you are already $9, $10, and the margin, the difference is rather limited. In the case of Europe, since the European prices are even lower than the Japanese prices, the margin is very limited. Therefore, we believe substantial amount of North American gas coming to Japan, for example, to Asia-Pacific markets, can bring the gas prices a couple of dollars down, give a strong card in the importer's hand, and it can play a role of a catalyst in order to move to pricing mechanisms which reflect the market realities much better, but to expect, to hope that the prices will come to the US price levels will be rather a wrong assumption, we believe. Therefore, there will be structural differences between US, Japan, and Europe. So, thank you very much for your patience, and let me finish my words to try to put them together. The energy world is changing very fast, as you see. The efficiency policies, Fukushima, shale gas revolution, new consumers coming in. So it is very important, we believe, for the energy consumers, producers, policymakers, industry, to understand what is going on and to be able to read the game. This is very important, to be able to read the game, because you have to take your position in a timely manner. If you are late, you are wrong, or you lose. Therefore, it is very important. There are some countries who did lose from that, some major exporting countries, and there are some countries who move fast. And therefore, we believe with the World Energy Outlook, with the International Energy Agency knowledge, we wanted to inform the policymakers to provide them a modus orientation for the fast-changing energy world. If you read our books, which is next to Mr. Tanner, we may find some hints there. So, China and then India will be the engine of global energy demand growth. As I said, oil trade is moving from the Atlantic Basin to the Pacific Basin. Today, the Pacific Basin's share in the total oil trade is about 1/3, and very soon it goes to 2/3. And it has major implications to the issue of hubs, to the security of oil pipelines and others. Technology is definitely opening up new oil resources. I talked to you about today, mentioned the shale oil, but there are other unconventional technologies in terms of oil, and we see, for example, oil sands from Canada coming. We were very happy the day before yesterday, Estonia being a member of the International Energy Agency, as 29th member of us. They have significant amount of oil shale. They may even provide in the very future. So this is opening new horizons, but it is very important for all of us to understand and give the right message that the Middle East is critical for the longer-term oil supply. And I think we shouldn't lose this horizon, at least I believe so. We believe the prices, regional prices, price gaps, especially in terms of natural gas, will be with us for many years to come. And the countries who want to compete with their industry, with their macroeconomy, and with other things, have to look at the other options. Some countries in Europe still say no to the shale gas production. They have to think perhaps twice. But one issue that they may all have to look into is as you discussed rightly yesterday, is the efficiency. Efficiency is a key policy instrument to address the competitiveness challenges. And finally, I didn't talk much today, but I wanted to tell you that we are going through very difficult times of economy, especially in Europe, but some emerging countries as well. But this issue shouldn't make us forget that the climate change is a major concern that we all have to take seriously. And it was a first ever that the IEA ministers last week in Paris had from an energy minister's point of view, made a statement, official statement on climate change, that the energy sector needs to take climate change seriously, to which Ambassador Pascual and other colleagues actively contributed. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol, for the excellent presentation. As always, obviously, we are very fortunate to hear firsthand from the author of the World Energy Outlook each year. Only 9 days it was launched, after it was launched in London on November the 12th. Ambassador Pascual, we do have some time. We can go until 10:15. So may I just kindly invite you to the podium for your remarks. Thank you.
First of all, the Atlantic Council and Fred Kemp and Ross Wilson and Damon Wilson and your whole team for putting together this incredible conference and the assembly of people who are here. It's always phenomenal to be here, just for the interactions that one has. So thank you all for coming, and keep coming, because it certainly makes it useful, invaluable for people like me to have an opportunity to meet with such a wide cross-section of individuals from government, from the private sector, who are so key to what we're trying to do in building an energy future. And it's always a pleasure to speak with Fatih Birol and speak after Fatih. He gives us such a wonderful perspective of what's happening in the changing world energy economy. And I will try to build on that and in a little bit less detail go into a few issues related to oil and gas and the geopolitical implications and their importance. And hopefully they might be insightful and lead to some more discussion. Last year when I was here, one of the things that I presented was the changing U.S. energy outlook. And it's striking when we look at the picture. As a result of a combination of entrepreneurship, technology, innovation, good policy, the United States has benefited from a phenomenal increase in the production of oil. It's increased over 30% over the last 5 years. And you see in the chart on the left-hand side of the page the pace of that increase. Which we've also seen in the United States is a decrease in consumption as a result of the efforts that we've put into fuel efficiency standards and trying to increase vehicle efficiency overall. The impact that it's had on the United States is it's allowed us to reduce our oil imports from about 60% of our consumption in 2005 to less than 40% last year, and it's on track to be somewhere around 35% this year. The question this continuously raises, and it's the most extensive question I get asked anywhere in the world, is whether this means the United States is going to lose its interest in peace and security in the world, peace and security in the Middle East, and our interest in the security of transport lanes. And the answer is absolutely not. And one of the reasons for this, and the unifying factor that we face, is price. Oil is a global commodity. We pay global prices. And so we are all unified by the reality that disruptions anywhere in the world are going to have an impact on global prices. It's going to have an impact on every country that's represented in this room. It's going to have an impact on economic productivity in the United States and the politics of our country and what people pay at the gasoline pump. And so when we look at this price chart, there are a couple of things that are interesting to come back to. First is the impact of the Libyan civil war in February of 2011, and where we see a first dramatic increase in prices from about $85 a barrel to almost close to $130 a barrel. Second is what we see in January of 2012 with the imposition of sanctions on Iran. Again, another similar increase in prices that goes up to $130 a barrel. But then afterwards, a surprising amount of stability. And here's one of the reasons why I say surprising. If we look at disruptions in global oil supply, we are at a level of disruption today at about 3 million barrels a day, which is unprecedented over the last 5 to 10 years. We see a significant amount that has been taken out as a result of disruptions in Libya recently, where at one point it was down to 100,000 barrels a day, gone back up to 600,000 barrels a day, 1 million barrels a day, 1.2 million barrels a day that have been removed from Iran on international markets. And so why is this playing out this way? And here's potentially something that's a little bit of insightful. If we look at the left-hand side of the page at 2012 production from OPEC, it gives us a sense of how much OPEC can technically produce. And if we look next to it in 2012 of what the actual call or requirement from OPEC was, it's actually less than that. So we were building up inventories. So let's compare against that what the world is looking like in 2013. You have a decrease in demand in the OECD countries. You have a decrease in the requirement because of non-gas liquids that are coming out of the OPEC countries. You have a decrease in requirements because of what we saw earlier of what's happening in the United States, with the U.S. increasing production of 1 million barrels a day last year, 1 million barrels a day this year, and now projected to be about 1.1 million barrels a day next year. So in effect, in that 3-year period, the United States is adding another Kuwait or UAE onto the global map at this period of time. And so compare then against that where the increases are coming from the non-OECD countries. And what does it tell us? It tells us that for 2013, the call on OPEC may actually be lower than it was last year. And so does that give us a perspective that we can actually maintain stability in international markets at this point in time? From the perspective of is there a capacity to supply the market and provide the commodity that's necessary, the answer is yes. Now, how that market will actually play itself out depends on a whole range of factors, including a lot of political ones. But that is an encouraging sign that we have been able to manage this incredibly difficult period while at the same time retaining relative stability in prices, although, as Fatih Birol just told us, those prices are extraordinarily high. Now, one of the things that this teaches us, and if we go back to, actually, I don't know how to go back on this chart. If we go back to this, one of the critical pieces of this chart is the increased call on OPEC from the non-OECD countries. And it becomes dramatic when you look at this chart. The blue side of this chart is demand for energy in the OECD countries. It is absolutely flat over the next 20-year period. And where is the demand increasing? It's in the non-OECD countries, and as Fatih just told us, principally in Asia, China, India, Indonesia, but also a big driver coming from the Middle East. One of the things that this tells us is that we have to fundamentally reassess and evaluate how we handle the challenges of energy governance in the world. In the IEA ministerial meeting that just took place, I think perhaps the most important thing that happened during that meeting is an issue that received very little attention. 6 countries, together with the IEA, China, India, Indonesia, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa, signed a letter of intent or issued a statement of intent saying that they are going to begin a process to figure out what a relationship of association would be between these emerging economies and the International Energy Agency. And that is fundamental to actually bring the principal sources of increased demand for the future into a system of governance that affects all of us. And look at it from this perspective. We have to understand, from the perspective of the United States, that the drivers of price in global energy markets tomorrow, the drivers of global oil prices, are going to be those consumers at the margin, which are going to be China and India and Brazil. And we have to ask ourselves this question: do we now have to be concerned about the ability of these countries to satisfy their energy demand? And the answer is yes. Is the pattern of energy use in this country going to affect our own economic incentives and interests? The answer is absolutely yes. And so what we need to be able to do is to develop a system of governance in the energy sector that allows us to work together on these issues to produce the kind of stability in markets that is conducive to sustainable economic growth. Let me move from oil to the gas markets. On gas, again, the United States has had a phenomenal increase in production of about 30% over the last 5 years. You can see on this chart what the projections are for U.S. import requirements, going down to about 6% in 2013, and the United States projected to be a net energy exporter, or a gas exporter, by the year 2020. The impact that this has had on global prices is demonstrated in this chart. Fatih began to outline these issues. It becomes quite dramatic here when you look at prices of about $3.50 at Henry Hub, $10 in Europe, $16 in Asia, and surprisingly South America being at close to $16 as well, as a result of the phenomenal increase in supply that we've had in the United States, other regions catching up to this. So let's understand behind this a little bit more of what it means and what it might mean for the future. I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that it is not just the United States that is increasing its production of gas. And it's not just unconventional gas, but it's also conventional gas. There's going to be a mixture of the two. And so we're going to have, as you see from this chart, the red line are projects where there have been final investment decisions. The blue line are planned projects that we see coming online into the future. And what it tells us is that we're going to see significant increases of gas on the international market from Australia, Mozambique, Tanzania, potentially from Nigeria if they can get their governance together, Canada, Norway, Israel. And the two big question marks that we have to talk about are going to be Russia and China and how they play into this market. But what this tells us is that it's not just a question of American supply, but changing global supply more generally. Together with that, we have to look at the form of trade in gas. And increasingly what we've seen across the blue line is that more and more gas is traded as LNG. So in effect, creating the capacity to have literally a more liquid market that potentially allows those markets to have arbitrage between areas that have differences in prices. And so how's this playing out right now? Let me go back to the point that Fatih was raising. If we look in the past, gas prices were pretty much unified throughout the world because they were essentially linked to oil prices and were bundled together. As the price of oil changed, the price of gas changed. As a result of the changes that we've seen in the United States now and the breaking apart of the oil index link, we've seen gas prices in the United States come down. Gas prices in Europe become relatively flat at about $10 per million BTU. Gas prices in Asia continue to increase. And if you present this perspective to countries in Asia which have the highest demand as a prospect for the future, the immediate reaction is there's going to be a major problem here, exactly as Fatih said. One, because of the question of differences in economic competitiveness. But then secondly, what are the implications for Asia's energy security and geopolitical considerations if they're in a situation where they're a gas importer at much higher prices than the rest of the world? And so what we're beginning to see today is a world in which countries in the Asian market are starting to take note of this and act on it. They're extremely sensitive and cognizant to the fact that the principal source of increased demand is internally within Asia, and that has been a driver within price. And so if you look at the colored bars, which represent the Asian market, well over about 60% of the growth that we're going to see in the global market is going to come from Asia. Another factor behind price is infrastructure. This picture is striking for the following reason. In the top part of the page, we see the gas infrastructure in the United States. In the bottom part, we see the gas infrastructure in Europe. As a result of it, you get significant capacity to trade, significant storage capacity, significant pipeline capacity, the ability to have arbitrage internally within a region, and to the extent to which there are seasonal differentiations in prices, the ability to store and trade and to be able to have an impact on leavening those out. You look across the page to China and Japan, and the map speaks for itself. If you're in Japan and each one of these dots represents an LNG terminal that's generally associated with a power plant, if you need to be able to import gas in order to power that plant, you're going to import the gas. If the price is 16, you're going to buy it at 16. If the price is at 20, you're going to buy it at 20. And so the first challenge it presents us is, how do you change the energy infrastructure and the gas infrastructure to make this market one which can be more competitive? In China, we're starting to see some of those actions already. And so what we see represented in this map are the kinds of changes that China is putting in place. We see at the top part of it a pipeline from Turkmenistan at 65 billion cubic meters, negotiations that have already taken place to be able to expand that. At the bottom, a pipeline which will come up from Myanmar that will add another 12 billion cubic meters. Negotiations with Russia are potentially the closest that they've ever been to finally being able to reach agreement on a gas pipeline from Russia, supported extensively by changes in gas pricing policy that China made in July of this year. China has put in place more LNG infrastructure, and so what we're beginning to see is a Chinese policy of energy security and diversification of supply that potentially allows it to be a more significant player in this market. The other country that I think we have to pay particular attention to is Russia. Now, if you look at Russia's exports, and Tatiana Mitrova is going to speak on the next panel and will speak of this with much greater expertise than I will certainly ever have. But here are a couple of things that strike me from this perspective. Russia's exports right now, when you look at a combination of pipelines and LNG trade, are somewhere in the order of about 170 BCM. The vast majority of that coming to Europe and the former Soviet countries. If we look at Russian pipeline capacity, it tells us that it's going virtually all to Europe, that it has far much greater pipeline capacity than it can fill, and it is ever going to need to be filled in the coming decades. And indeed, Russia is adding yet more pipeline capacity if it goes through with the building of South Stream. And then if you look in the other direction of what's going to the fastest growing gas market in the world in Asia, it's 14 BCM. And so here's a very simple fundamental point. The world needs more Russian gas in Asia. And the United States fully and absolutely supports that. We don't see it as competition. We see it as absolutely complementary to the interests of the United States. And let me put it in this perspective, and Fatih outlined the point. If we start with a gas price of, let's say, $4 in the United States, and you liquefy that gas and you send it to Asia, and it gets there for $12 per million BTU, and the price prevailing in the market is 16 or 20, what's going to happen? You're going to have a movement of gas into that Asian market. But if you have a gas price of 4 and it goes into that market at 12, and there's Russian gas and Australian gas and Mozambican gas and Tanzanian gas playing out into that market where you have a new clearing price of 12, what does it mean for the United States? It means that we're both getting the benefit of relatively low gas prices domestically that support our petrochemicals industry and our steel industry and aluminum industry, and allows us to be an exporter into this market. And so when you come back to the question that Fatih asked, is how much gas is the United States going to be able to export? It's not a static question. It's a dynamic one that we have to continue to evaluate based on what is coming onto that international market, what impact does it have on American competitiveness, and how do those additional exports play into that global market? And from that perspective, the more gas that gets into that international market, it supports the demands for growth that we see playing out in the Asian market. It helps promote the diversification of fuel supplies to deal with the fundamental problems of increased coal use, and ideally over time will help be able to push the price of gas down so that it can become more competitive with coal. And it helps us from a perspective of getting greater economic growth in the Asian region. And so over time, and Tatiana, I hope you'll take this back and it becomes a point that's internalized, perspective the United States brings to this issue is more Russian gas is definitely a good thing. Now, what does it mean for the future of what a gas market might look like? If we want to see the kind of competition that we're talking about here and be able to get the competition and trade across different regions, it's going to mean that a whole series of issues are going to have to be addressed. Physically, that market is going to have to be more liquid. We know that there are going to have to be investments in LNG regasification infrastructure and connecting pipelines and storage and more tankers, because right now the majority of those tankers are associated with individual LNG projects, and so if we want more traders coming into that marketplace, we have to make it easier for them to be able to participate and move commodity around the world. There are certain issues related to market rules that are going to have to develop. Questions that have already begun to be addressed in the European market, such as the elimination of destination clauses or third-party access to the infrastructure. There needs to be further development in Asia and the connection between commodity markets and financial markets on how both investments and infrastructure development are made and how commodities are traded. And finally, there needs to be data to have transparency in the way that transactions are conducted so that both consumers and producers have a greater capacity to participate. This is an issue that the IEA is taking on. The Asian Development Bank is getting increasingly involved. The United States has an interest in supporting it. Japan has been a big promoter of this as part of a producer-consumer dialogue. India has been a particular promoter of these issues. And so what we hope to see is an environment where there is greater and more fluid competition, with that competition giving producers over the long term the kind of security and price that allows them to make the 10, 20, and $30 billion investments that are being made in the production of LNG, and at the same time have the benefit of competition for consumers. Now, how does that play out in a few geopolitical issues? And let me close with just a couple of slides. Last year, I showed you a version of this slide and an interesting story that came up around it. As a result of American production of gas, the United States is essentially right now importing about 5 BCM of gas. It was seen that we would be importing at this point in time about 80 BCM of gas. That difference or that margin has gone to other parts of the world. A significant amount of it went to Europe, especially around 2010, 2011. It decreased some in 2012. That increased supply, combined with changes that have been taking place in European policies. So for example, you can no longer produce the gas, own the pipelines, and own the distribution system, which has created an environment of greater competition in this market. These measures, together with interconnectors of pipelines that have now allowed gas to be traded from not just east to west, but west to east, north to south, south to north, have actually created a competitive market in Europe. And we've seen that in renegotiation of gas prices between Western European utilities and Gazprom to reduce prices and increase the financing terms. In 2012, the principal supplier of gas into this European market was not Gazprom, but Statoil. And that change in competition occurred in a period of 5 years. And let me tell you how striking it is today. As a result of the increased and high gas prices that are prevailing in the Asian market, what many of the traders in LNG are doing today in Europe is diverting cargoes from the European market, sending them to Asia, getting the benefit of that arbitrage, and in the past 6 months actually increasing imports from Gazprom because they made a greater profit paying a higher price to Russia and Gazprom for their gas, but making the money off the arbitrage off of the Asian market. What it tells us is that this is a dynamic market. It's going to continue to change, and those who are playing in this market have to have the diversity of supply that's necessary in order to provide stability. So what does it mean for this region? And let me start with a project that is, we hope, close to a final investment decision, and it's the Southern Corridor, bringing gas from Azerbaijan across through Turkey into the European market through Greece, Albania, and Italy. There are a few key issues that have to be addressed that are going to bring this to a final investment decision. It is a vision of a project that starts to be a unifying force between the Caspian, Central Asia, Turkey, and the European market. And so now is the critical time when all of the key players have to be able to make those critical commercial choices that actually make this project a reality. And so our hope is that over the next month, we'll be able to see that happen and come to a final investment decision that will allow this project to then start bringing gas into the European market in about 2017, 2018. We have to ask ourselves the question about South Stream. Given what we've seen about Asia, given the pipeline capacity that Russia already has to the European market, is this pipeline going to be built? If it is built, it's not because the capacity is needed, it's because there are other drivers that are pushing it forward. If we go further south, there's a whole series of issues that are going to emerge about the Eastern Mediterranean and the potential that exists in Cyprus, in Israel, the developments that may come out of Lebanon. This we know that there is a significant amount of gas. If we look at Israel itself, which is producing now about 6 or 7 BCM, 60 to 70% of Israel's supply, and you put that in an Israeli context and its constant dependence on energy imports that it's had throughout its history, and ask, is that geopolitically significant for Israel's ability to establish its independence? Absolutely, you bet. And then you ask the question, with the development of the Leviathan field, depending on what happens internally within Israel, giving it the potential to export, how can that affect the dynamics of the region? And add to that the potential that exists in Cyprus, where many of the same companies are participating in the Cyprus development. And what kind of export capabilities might we begin to see? There are a number of options that are going to be explored. Some are talking about LNG. Some are talking about a pipeline to Turkey. Some are talking about sharing it with neighbors. Others are talking about pipelines that could connect it to the Red Sea and move it into the Asian market. This, we know that there's not enough to do all of that. What we also know is that whatever develops is going to depend on commercial viability. And we also know that given the history, that most of those countries are going to want to have options in whatever choices that they pursue. I think it's too early to predict what the outcomes are going to be. But what we do know is that the conversations between the countries of the region and the companies of the region at this stage are absolutely critical to establish what is both commercially viable and politically acceptable to come up with outcomes that blend those two together that work for all of the countries of the region. What I want to close on is the question of Iraq. Iraq, its relationship with Turkey, how Kurdistan plays into this picture, and the changing oil picture that we're seeing in the Kurdistan region over time. One of the things that we know is that there is a phenomenal resource in the Kurdistan region. And as a result of investments that have been made by a whole series of companies, some from the region, some internationally, more and more oil is being produced. That is a good thing. It is not a bad thing. And the strategy and the approach that the United States has taken is to try to encourage a conversation between the countries of the region, Iraq, Turkey, with the incorporation of all of the regions of Iraq, including the Kurdistan region, to develop an export strategy that maximizes the amount of oil that can get onto international markets, that brings benefits back to the Iraqi state and to the Iraqi people. Recently, the Turkish foreign minister, Mr. Davutoglu, was in Baghdad, and on his departure, paid particular focus on the Iraq strategic pipeline. In fact, it's a series of pipelines that could potentially connect Basra to Haditha, back onto the Turkish border and into Ceyhan. And with that, having an interconnecting pipeline which is virtually completed and being tested through the Kurdistan region. This is a particularly important and sensitive period of time. The parties in the region have an opportunity to bring all of these pieces together in a way that supports the unity of Iraq, more oil onto international markets, cooperation between the countries of the region, and cooperation between Kurdistan region and Baghdad. And so the approach that the United States has been trying to support is a positive outcome that supports both the evacuation of commodities onto international markets and a positive political environment. Turkey has been absolutely central to helping this occur in a positive and constructive way. The exchange of visits between the foreign ministers was absolutely key. Recently, we saw that the energy ministers met in Korea, Minister Yildiz with Deputy Prime Minister Shahrastani. There are proposals that have been put on the table that need work. And what we would encourage is for the key parties to get together, to meet, to have discussions, and to bring to concrete closure the potential for an understanding that serves both the country's interests of the region, the company interests of the region, and helps the Iraqi people in the regions of Iraq to feel that they have the capacity to utilize their resources in a way that is to the benefit of their own people and to international markets as well. What this tells us is that for this region, Europe, the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean, that one thing is absolutely clear. Turkey is at the center of these issues politically and economically. Someone asked me the other day, is Turkey going to become a transit hub? It is a transit hub. It is a political hub. It is an economic hub. And so it is absolutely appropriate that we're having this conversation here now. I thank the Atlantic Council for making it possible and all of you for joining. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Pascual. We still have some time left, not too long, but short. I'm going to be very quick. This year's theme of our conference is, as you know, exploring the new landscape. I think we just took an excellent tour of that new landscape with two incredibly able experts. I had prepared some questions, but so that I can give you a chance to ask questions to, and Ambassador Pascual already answered many of my questions. I just want to ask you a very quick question to Dr. Birol, and then we can take questions from the floor. Last year and again this year, in your report, you treat energy efficiency in the same way as a conventional fuel. I want to basically draw our attention then in that respect that energy efficiency in a sense becomes a sector, an industry. And your report again this year puts a lot of focus on competitiveness. How do you see which country is becoming more competitive in energy efficiency as a sector, as a business, as an industry by itself?
I think first of all, if you go one step back, many countries have been saying, many governments, the energy efficiency is very important to address the climate change, environmental issues. But to be honest with you, when we look at the numbers, we didn't see much happening from that. But when the energy prices went up, now governments are pushing the button in order to reduce the cost of energy, improve their competitiveness. High energy prices do not necessarily mean high energy cost. If you use energy efficiently, if you reduce the cost of energy. Which countries are doing now? United States, number one. When we talk about the U.S. oil import relying of or reducing the oil import dependency, becoming self-sufficiency, we mainly talk about the increasing oil production. But this is only one part of the story. There is the other part of the story which brings us to the great success in the United States, namely, U.S. is now putting a lot of new efficiency measures in order to reduce the oil consumption at home, especially in the transportation sector. The cars, U.S. cars, are going to be more and more efficient, almost as efficient as the Japanese and the European, which brings the U.S. oil consumption down, plus the production is going up, then the imports will be almost coming to zero. So there are two legs of the success story in the United States: increasing oil production and decreasing oil consumption, mainly as a result of efficiency. US number one, and the second country I would say is China. China is pushing this very strongly, especially in the industry sector and especially for the electrical engines and electrical motors, in order to again bring the cost down and also decreasing the local pollution. So I would suggest these two countries. Of course, Europe and Japan are making major efforts, but the biggest bang will come from these two countries, China plus US.
Our time is practically over, but I think we can steal 5 minutes from our coffee break, and I know there are questions. Please go ahead. Can we have a microphone, please? Right here to the front row. There you go.
Oda Aberdeen, that Capital Trust Group. In view of this promising revolution in gas and oil, can you link that to food security, which is of importance to this region, and also water shortages? If you look at this region, if you look at Africa, how can we translate this revolution in gas prices and gas supplies and oil into increasing food production and water supply? Because this region in Africa suffer from food security and from water shortages.
The linkages between energy, food security, and agricultural production are huge. And I think some of the areas that we're going to see the biggest impact are in Asia and Southeast Asia and Africa. In Asia, so much of the energy consumption, the electricity consumption, is actually taken up in irrigation and pumps. In India, it's probably about a third of the demand. And so the first issue is not just gas, but it's actually going back to Orhan's question about energy efficiency. Just changing the efficiency of pumps may seem like a small thing and not something terribly dramatic and exciting in terms of having a massive impact on the global energy picture of India, but it absolutely is. And you can repeat that story in many other parts of the world. In terms of gas and whether it has a direct impact on food, one of the things that I think we're all trying to look at globally is what are the increased applications that one can have for the use of gas in a range of different environments. And to the extent to which gas can become a commodity that is used much more broadly for other energy purposes, it can have potentially an impact on oil or transit and reduce consumption for transportation. How those issues play themselves back into the agricultural sector, to me, are not completely clear. Where I would put the biggest attention on linkages with agriculture end up being on issues related to electricity consumption, irrigation, use of water, and whether or not, as a result of those efficiency measures and reduction and more effective consumption of water, we can then create a better environment, a more economic environment for the production of agriculture in Asian markets and in Africa.
Thank you, Ambassador Pascual. I'm going to take one more question, and from Ms. Mitrova, Tatiana Mitrova, please. May I have a microphone there, please?
My name is Nikki Javela. I'm a member of the Energy Committee of the European Parliament.
Sorry.
My question to Ambassador Pascual is the following. How possible do you see the construction of the XL pipeline from Canada, which maybe will lead to the realization of the sweet dream that Mr. Birol said? And my question to Mr. Birol is, even if there is a marginal profit for the European states to import from USA, still, the numbers are high. How do you see this developing? Because there is a lot of discussion about importing gas and oil from USA in Brussels, which will definitely help the economic crisis in Europe.
Let me hear the question.
Did you hear your part?
Of course, I heard mine. Perhaps I can start and Mr. Ambassador can elaborate. Now, I think this will be having the US or, in any case, Canadian gas to Europe would be definitely helpful for the Europeans, first of all, to at least make their hands stronger in terms of renegotiation of the prices. I can tell you the situation in Europe currently is not very bright in terms of energy. I was looking, we have about 700 pages of a book, and we look at the refinery sector, we look at the competitiveness and so on. It is very difficult for me to find the good news for Europe in the entire book in terms of energy, to be very frank. But sound European policies can really help. One of them would be the current LNG, current pipeline contracts in Europe, about 2/3 are expiring within the next 10 years. 2/3 of them, long-term contracts. And Europe can well renegotiate these contracts, bring the prices down, and in that case, the US gas or the Canadian gas and other gas can help to make, can help European hands being stronger in the renegotiations of these existing contracts to bring the prices down. Therefore, this will be definitely helpful for Europe to have more LNG in the system, say from United States or Canada or elsewhere. But of course, Europe may want to look at also it is domestic gas production as well, including the shale gas under certain circumstances.
Ambassador Pascual, if I may just get a closing statement from you for a minute or so, and then we'll wrap it up, especially in relation to Europe and its competitors.
One of the things that I think is dramatically illustrated by the work that Fatih, the IEA, have done and the WEO is that we do have this phenomenally changing energy picture. It presents us with a lot of opportunity. There is an increase in the availability of supplies in ways that we simply would not have predicted a decade ago. That gives us a degree of flexibility that we have in the global marketplace that we may not have expected. The increased supplies of gas give us the opportunity to be able to utilize that as a bridging fuel that reduces the overall emissions profile globally. In the United States, the use of gas has helped us achieve the lowest CO2 emission levels that we've had in 16 years. If we look at China, any kind of scenario that one would look at that has reduction in CO2 emissions is going to significantly depend on their ability to utilize more gas simply because of the capacity factors involved in switching from gas to coal and the greater ability to utilize that than renewable sources. What we also have to understand is how to eventually use that bridging opportunity for a better integration of renewable sources and energy efficiency. It's an equation that has to be brought together. And so our ability to deal with these issues across the United States, Europe, and Asia is probably the most significant intersection of energy and climate issues that we face. Because if we cannot effectively achieve this kind of diversification to reduce our overall use of coal, bring up the use of other fuel sources, address the energy security concerns that countries have in the course of doing that, and to be able to continue to stimulate and fuel economic growth. If we can't figure out how to solve that equation, then we simply are not going to allow a future to the next generation. We have resources now that give us the capacity and the bridge to be able to do it. We now have to have the political will and the strategic intelligence, foresight, and determination to bring it forward. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we face today in the governance of energy policy.
Thank you very much. I really want to thank to both of our panelists, our guides, for exploring this new energy landscape this morning. Before we basically applaud them, let me give you a very quick programming notes. We have an excellent lineup today, as you know, throughout the day. A couple of highlights: the luncheon by Secretary Albright, and I especially wanted to draw everybody's attention to our closing session on Syria. We will have two former national security advisors, another leading experts, and it will be moderated of our own Atlantic Council's Ambassador Fred Huff, who is one of the leading experts on Syria in the United States. With that said, it's going to be a very short coffee break. The next session starts at half an hour of the hour. And I thank you very much. And I, again, all together with you, thank our panelists for a wonderful discussion.